Right now, somewhere in a server farm in Northern Virginia, an algorithm is calculating a number. That number has your name attached to it. It determines whether you get that loan, whether you're granted bail, whether your resume ever reaches human eyes, and no one, not your lawyer, not the judge, not the loan officer, will ever be able to tell you how that number was calculated. Last year, in the Netherlands, a government system called CRI quietly flagged over 20,000 families as potential welfare fraudsters. It analyzed data points you'd never think to hide, whether you'd ever received a parking ticket, whether your neighbor had been investigated before, whether your electricity usage pattern looked suspicious. 20,000 families placed under digital surveillance, not because they'd done anything wrong, but because a mathematical model decided their lives looked statistically similar to people who had. The Dutch courts eventually ruled the system illegal, calling it a violation of human rights. But by the time that ruling came down, careers had ended, marriages had collapsed, children had been taken into care. This is not a cautionary tale about one broken system in one European country. This is the blueprint for how every institution you interact with is learning to operate. And the most dangerous part? You will never know when you've been flagged. The term for this is algorithmic decision-making. It sounds technical. It sounds neutral. It sounds like something that belongs in an engineering textbook, not a courtroom or a hospital or a hiring office. But that clinical language is the first deception. Because the algorithms running these decisions are not neutral. They are mirrors. And what they reflect is us. Specifically, they reflect every prejudice, every structural inequality, every historical injustice that existed in the data they were trained on. According to a 2023 investigation by the Algorithmic Justice League, algorithmic decision systems now operate inside more than 70% of US state and federal agencies. That means the government is already using opaque mathematical models to decide who gets bail, who keeps their benefits, who gets flagged for investigation. And in the vast majority of cases, the code behind these decisions is proprietary. You cannot read it. You cannot challenge it. In many cases, you cannot even confirm that it exists in the first place. Dr. Cathy O'Neill, the mathematician who wrote the book Weapons of Math Destruction, described the problem with devastating precision. She said, "Algorithms are opinions embedded in code. Every line of code that determines your credit score, your employability, your risk to society, those are not objective truths. Those are someone's opinion about what matters, translated into math, and then deployed at a scale no human bureaucrat could ever achieve." The researcher Safiya Noble, author of Algorithms of Oppression, identified an even deeper problem. She documented how search algorithms don't just reflect existing biases, they amplify them, create feedback loops that turn minor prejudices into systemic exclusion. A hiring algorithm that slightly favors male candidates doesn't just perpetuate the existing gender gap. Over years of operation, it widens it. Because every biased decision becomes part of the training data for the next generation of the algorithm. The bias compounds. Here is what happened while everyone was debating whether AI would become conscious. The year is 2016. Investigative journalists at ProPublica make a discovery that should have dominated headlines for months and reshaped criminal justice policy across the Western world. They analyzed a piece of software called Compass. It stands for Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. The kind of bureaucratic name designed to make you stop asking questions before you even start. Compass was deployed across courtrooms in the United States to predict whether a defendant would commit another crime. It produced a score from 1 to 10. Judges looked at that number and made life-altering decisions: bail amounts, sentencing length, whether someone went home to their family or waited in jail for trial. ProPublica's analysis revealed something that should have triggered a constitutional crisis. The algorithm was wrong about black defendants and white defendants in completely opposite directions. Black defendants who never committed another crime were nearly twice as likely to be labeled high risk compared to white defendants. Meanwhile, white defendants who did reoffend were more frequently labeled low risk. The algorithm was not merely biased, it was perfectly mathematically reversing reality along racial lines. And here is the detail that should genuinely terrify you. Northpoint, the company that built Compass, still refuses to release its formula. It is proprietary, it is a trade secret, and you can be sentenced to years in prison based on a numerical score generated by a formula that you are legally prohibited from seeing. You are not allowed to know why you were convicted. When researchers asked Northpoint to defend their system, the company argued that the algorithm was validated by academic studies. But those studies were funded by Northpoint. The fox was certifying the security of the henhouse. But if you think this is a criminal justice problem that only affects people who get arrested, you need to widen your frame. Algorithmic bias is not confined to one broken system. It is an emergent property of an entire industry that has been given permission to automate human judgment without human accountability. In 2018, Amazon quietly scrapped an internal project that had consumed years of development and millions of dollars. They had built an AI hiring system, a tool designed to screen the thousands of resumes they received every day and identify the strongest candidates. The system was trained on 10 years of Amazon's historical hiring data, and it worked exactly as designed. It found patterns in that data. The pattern it found was this: Amazon's workforce was overwhelmingly male, and so the algorithm learned to penalize resumes that contained anything associated with women. The phrase "women's chess club captain" triggered a penalty. Any reference to a women's college was scored downward. The algorithm did exactly what it was trained to do. It learned from history and extended it into the future. The history said women do not belong in tech, so the algorithm ensured they continued not to belong. Amazon ultimately abandoned the system. But here is what almost no coverage mentioned. The algorithm was not malfunctioning. It was not broken. It was performing exactly as engineered, optimizing for the patterns it found in the training data. The problem was not the code. The problem was that the training data was a perfect record of decades of structural discrimination, and the algorithm treated that discrimination as ground truth. The same pattern repeats wherever you look. A 2019 study published in the journal Science examined a commercial algorithm used by major US hospitals to identify patients who needed additional medical care. The algorithm used healthcare spending as a proxy for sickness. The logic seems reasonable. Sicker people cost more to treat. Except that black patients in America systematically receive less medical spending than white patients with identical health conditions. The algorithm looked at the data and concluded, mathematically, logically, disastrously, that black patients were healthier than they actually were. They were denied care, not because they were well, but because the system had spent less money on them. More than 100 million Americans were affected by this single algorithm. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, I understand the problem. We need regulation. We need transparency laws. We need explainable AI. And you would be right. Those are the solutions everyone proposes. Politicians, tech CEOs, regulatory bodies. If we can just make the algorithms explainable, if we can make the companies show their work, we can fix this. Here is the counterintuitive, deeply uncomfortable truth that almost no one is willing to say out loud. That solution might not just fail, it might actively make the problem worse. Let me break down why the transparency solution may be an illusion. First, explainable AI does not mean what most people think it means. In almost every implementation, it means the AI tells you which features were most influential in its decision. Your zip code was weighted at 43%, your credit history at 31%. But it does not, and structurally cannot, tell you why those features matter. Whether they are legitimate proxies for what the algorithm claims to measure, or whether they are simply laundering discrimination through seemingly neutral variables. You can learn that the algorithm denied your mortgage because of your neighborhood, without ever learning that your neighborhood is an almost perfect statistical proxy for your race. Second, transparency creates a perverse strategic incentive. If companies know their algorithms will be audited, they do not optimize for fairness. They optimize for audit proofing. They strip out the obviously discriminatory variables, like race and gender, and replace them with mathematically equivalent proxies that produce the exact same outcomes. Your zip code, your school district, your browser history, your shopping patterns. The discriminatory effect remains intact. It is just buried deeper under layers of statistical complexity that auditors are not equipped to untangle. And third, and most fundamentally, the complexity of modern machine learning systems makes genuine explainability, the kind that would satisfy a court of law or a human rights tribunal, mathematically impossible. Deep neural networks make decisions based on interactions between billions of parameters. Those interactions create emergent patterns that even the engineers who designed the system cannot trace. Asking, why did this neural network reject this specific applicant, is the philosophical equivalent of asking, which specific neuron in your brain caused you to fall in love? The question may be meaningful at a human level, but at the level of the system, it simply does not have an answer. The legal scholar Frank Pasquale, who wrote The Black Box Society, put it this way: we are moving toward a society in which the most important decisions are made by systems that are authorized to act, but not authorized to explain. He calls it the paradox of algorithmic authority. We grant these systems the power of judgment precisely because we believe they transcend human bias, and then we discover they encode human bias at industrial scale. And we cannot fix them because we cannot understand them. And we cannot abandon them because we have built our institutions around them. So where does this leave us? With institutions that make life-altering decisions about millions of people every single day, and no one, not the companies, not the regulators, not the engineers, can fully explain how or why those decisions are made. You are being sorted into categories, assigned risk scores, granted or denied opportunities by systems that their own creators do not understand. Here is what I believe. And I want to be direct about it. We have been treating algorithmic bias as a technical problem because that framing is comfortable. It lets us talk about bias mitigation strategies and fairness metrics and debiasing techniques, as if this were an engineering challenge with an optimal solution waiting to be discovered. It is not. This is a problem of power. These algorithms do not operate in an abstract mathematical space. They operate inside a society that is already deeply unequal, a society in which wealth, opportunity, and dignity are distributed along racial, gender, and class lines that were drawn long before the first line of code was written. And the people who design, fund, and deploy these systems are overwhelmingly the people who have benefited from that inequality. The question we should be asking is not, can we make the algorithm less biased? The question is, who granted anyone the authority to automate the judgment of human beings in the first place? Because every black box algorithm at its core performs the same function. It replaces human discretion, flawed, inconsistent, and yes, sometimes biased, with mathematical certainty that no individual is accountable for. When a human judge makes a bad decision, we can demand an explanation. We can appeal. We can vote them out of office. When an algorithm makes a bad decision, the company invokes trade secrets. The engineer admits the system is too complex to interpret. And you, the person whose life was just determined by a number you are not allowed to see, are told, in effect, to trust the math. That is not technological progress. That is power without responsibility. And the political philosopher has a word for power without responsibility. They call it tyranny. Next week on Future Frame, we go deeper into the algorithmic rabbit hole. What happens when the system that judges you is not biased at all? It is perfectly fair, mathematically flawless. And it is still wrong. A story about probability, prediction, and why perfect math can destroy perfectly innocent lives. The case that changed how I think about justice in the age of machines.